and thanks for joining SlashData's latest webinar today. My name is Moskula, and I will be your MC. Today's webinar is titled Developers' Expectations from Employers. This presentation will be run by our very own data journalist, Richard Muir, who is and has been a key analyst at SlashData, especially at uncovering hidden patterns and meaningful insights from the data. SlashData is a research analyst firm. So we are focused on the developer economy. We help top tech orgs get to know their target developer audiences, what they're using and not using, and how they are making these decisions. And lastly, where are they going? So what is the future and what are the emerging areas we should all be watching? Now, we do that by running global developer surveys. Here are some key facts of our surveys. We uncover all developer audiences, anything from mobile to machine learning and AR/VR, and pulling the responses of more than 30,000 developers annually. Noting here also from over 150 countries, we publish a great deal of research studies each year. And on that note, I'm going to pass it on to Richard, who's going to take on for the rest of the presentation. Thank you very much.
So thanks very much for the intro, Moskula. Today I'll be talking to you about what would make developers leave their employers. In the 21st edition of our Developer Nation survey, we asked developers what, if anything, would make them leave their employers. And we wanted to do this to get a view of developers as employees as well as consumers. This gives a much richer view into what developers find important. And the key insights of what we found here are, firstly, nearly 2/3 of developers would switch employer for higher compensation or better benefits. But also softer perks such as remote or flexible working are also important. And we found this was more so for developers in China than in North America. But on the other hand, Eastern European developers feel underpaid, and actually a better benefits package won't help. And finally, we saw that compensation becomes more important as developers gain experience. So let's take a deep dive into this analysis. We find that developers consider both short and long-term success when deciding to change employers. This graph here shows in the light blue which reasons all developers selected for reasons that they might change employer. And in the dark blue, this is excluding developers who selected compensation or benefits. So we can see here in the first instance that half of developers would change company for better pay. And when we exclude of all the developers who selected higher compensation or better benefits, we're left with just 1/3 of developers. And this shows that developers are highly trained specialist employees and that they know their worth. In fact, we see that just 1 in 10 developers say that nothing would make them leave their current employer. So this means that 2/3 of developers selected higher compensation or better benefits as possible reasons for leaving. So to flip this around, what we see here is that actually just over 1/3 of developers have motivations that extend beyond the immediate financial reward. When we remove the 2/3 of developers who said that compensation and benefits would incentivize them to move, career advancement and broadening skills take the top 2 spots. And actually, these are in 2nd and 3rd place, respectively, when we consider all developers. And so what this shows is that developers are really hungry to learn and to progress. And these are factors for developers who could be tempted by, and these are important factors for developers who could be tempted by financial rewards and those who couldn't. So when developers are looking at career advancement or broadening their skills and knowledge, the focus on financials is not explicit nor immediate, but both of these factors can certainly contribute to higher salaries in the future. Really interestingly, when we exclude those developers who have these financial motivations of better benefits and higher compensation, the proportion who said that nothing would make them change employer rises to nearly 3 in 10. If there's any managers listening here who are struggling with retention, increasing pay or benefits seems to be very likely to reduce the temptation to leave. But it's not just pay and benefits that dominate the conversation here. There's many other softer perks are also important to a significant number of developers. So around a quarter or over a quarter could be tempted to move by a remote position. And just over 1 in 8 would switch employer for relocation. And we know that software development has historically been a pioneering industry for remote working. and the pandemic has likely made this especially salient for developers. We also see that 1 in 5 developers selected company culture as a tempting reason to switch employers. And there are well-documented issues with culture in software development. There have been several high-profile cases of discriminatory working practices, and many software developers are no strangers to long hours, especially as a project nears completion. So if you employ developers, you should therefore ensure that the working environment is safe and inclusive at a minimum, but should also consider how the company culture contributes to the health and well-being of employees in other ways. When we take a regional view of this data, we find that Eastern European developers are the most concerned with compensation. And here on this chart, we have these same reasons for changing employer, but split by 3 interesting regions: the Greater China in dark blue, Eastern Europe in light blue, and North America in yellow. And we see immediately that Eastern European developers are the most likely to move for better compensation. Nearly 7 in 10 say that this would make them switch employers. And this could well be due to their close geographical proximity to richer Western European countries. And this likely makes depressed salaries in the region feel particularly unfair. And for these developers in Eastern Europe that are underpaid, an upgraded benefits package really won't cut the mustard. Instead, we find that broadening skills, selected by 50% of these developers, taking on a more challenging role, selected by 32%, or relocation, selected by 22%, are much more important than average to these developers. It seems that Eastern European developers are taking a longer-term look at their finances and possibly considering uprooting their lives for an increased chance of success. When we look to North America, we see that developers here seem the happiest at their current jobs. We find that 14% say that nothing would make them switch. As we found with most regions, higher compensation is the most tempting option. Half of developers in North America selected this. But these developers are much less likely than average to select career advancement, broadening skills, or taking on a more challenging role as reasons for moving. So by and large, North American developers appear to be satisfied with their professional lives. But for those who would be tempted to move, higher compensation is mentioned as a reason by 3 in 5. When we look to Chinese developers, we see something very different. Once again, compensation is also important, but we also find that Chinese developers are very likely to select more or better benefits as being a reason for moving. And this is, we found that financial motivations are true for most developers, but actually in Greater China, developers here are some of the most likely to select softer benefits, such as a better company culture, where 25% selected this, better working environments, 25% selected this, or shorter commutes. And we've seen that the Chinese government is taking steps to reduce the 996 working culture, which is prevalent in many tech organizations in the country. And for those that aren't aware, this is working from 9 till 9, 6 days a week for a 72-hour working week. And actually, if the Chinese government is successful in reducing this culture of long working hours, actually culture may well be less important to Chinese developers in the future. We also see that developers here are less likely to say that remote or flexible working would tempt them to switch. Such flexibility is more highly valued by developers in Eastern Europe or North America. And I think what we're seeing here is the pandemic's effect on working culture and how this has affected different regions in different ways. Developers in North America may well be used to working from home after more than a year of doing so. And with Eastern Europe already an established outsourcing destination, remote work is more likely to be salient for developers here. On the other hand, developers in regions that have limited opportunities to offer are more likely to see remote working as a door opener to the global labor market. So more than 1 in 3 developers in the Middle East and Africa, and 30% of developers in South America, for example, would switch employers to get a remote job. Now we'll move forward and take a look at the experience levels of developers. Here we see that experienced developers are the most content in their jobs. What we have here are the same reasons for switching employer, but this time split by a developer's level of experience. And experienced developers are the most content in their jobs. Around 1 in 6 of those with 16 or more years of experience say that nothing would make them move. We can see how this increases from a low point of 3 to 5. We also see that these most experienced developers are the most financially motivated. So slightly over half say that higher compensation may tempt them to move. And we see this also increases as developers gain experience. And this shows that as developers develop in their career, they know better which roles they want to take. And we find that managerial positions often form an artificial ceiling. So some experienced developers will want to stay closer to the code. They're being more picky about which roles they take. Career advancement and taking on a more challenging role both peak for developers with 3 to 5 years under their belts. A well-timed change at this point in a developer's career can have a really large impact on their future earnings and professional success. And when we get to 3 to 5 years of experience, many developers are beginning to feel established and comfortable in their skills. So a challenging opportunity can often provide a catalyst for future success. We see much smaller changes as developers gain experience for benefits, company culture, and physical working environments. We can see that actually many of these lines are fairly flat. What this means is that developers at all experience levels have similar views on the importance of these things. But interestingly, remote working isn't so important to early career developers. And this could be that many developers at this stage of their careers value the close contact with colleagues that allows them to learn. So there are many reasons why a developer may choose to switch employers. And whilst it's impossible to ignore the impact of compensation, other factors play a really important role, especially as the role of work in our lives continues to evolve. For those concerned with hiring and retaining developers, money definitely talks, but it's not the only topic of conversation. So just to wrap up here, what we've learned today is that nearly 2/3 of developers would switch employer for higher compensation or better benefits, but actually there's lots of other factors at play which are important to developers, like softer perks, such as remote or flexible working. But these are more important for developers in China than in North America. But actually, many of these softer perks are important to developers at all levels of experience. In Eastern Europe, developers feel underpaid and better benefits won't help. But actually, we see that many Eastern European developers would consider remote working as an option or even relocation. And this is something that we find replicated in other less economically powerful regions. Developers would move or work remotely in order to advance their careers. And finally, we see that although more experienced developers are more satisfied in their roles and are less likely to move, compensation does become more important as developers gain experience. And here developers are becoming pickier about which roles they will take. So thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to get in touch with us and find out more about this topic or any other topic concerning developers, please get in touch.
Thank you very much, Rich. See you next time.